Salud. Hey everybody on YouTube. Welcome back to my channel. Long time no see. It's me, Rachel, the student witch. I hope you're doing well. Man, it's been a couple months, but it's been a crazy couple months. But anyhow, let's take a sip. I'm enjoying an afternoon beer. I'm here to talk about my growing pagan-y, polytheistic kind of pantheon as part of my explorations with the spirit model of Magick, and talk about my growing and deepening relationship with the goddess Brigid. And right on cue, Luna has jumped up on my little desk here next to the window so she can observe the pigeons who are having babies and making babies because it's springtime here. And you might hear some sounds in the background like keyboards clicking because I have y'all in our kind of makeshift home office. I'm just working on my dissertation. My partner is lucky enough to have a job that he can, work from home. And he's been working from home since, I think, March. So there he is, but the lighting is just too good to pass up in the afternoon in this room. So forgive me for the fuzzy, adorable distractions and the keyboard, handsome Chilean man distractions. I think part of the reason why I've put off making this video, aside from life being kind of hectic and crazy, which I'll get into here in a minute, but I put this off because I just didn't know where to start. And I didn't know, I was afraid that when I finally kind of gathered or felt that I had gathered my thoughts enough to make this video, I was afraid that I was going to leave something out. But inevitably I'm going to leave probably a lot of details out in kind of telling my story of the past few months of my deepening relationship with the goddess Brigid, and also my thoughts and my deepening relationship with the other goddesses or goddess energies that I work with, and my kind of quote-unquote holy trinity of goddesses that I'm currently working with now, of which Brigid is now a part of, or repeated of, which Brigid is now a part of. Fuck it, I end sentences and phrases with prepositions because I'm not a grammar Nazi, because I feel being a quote-unquote grammar Nazi has like roots in classism. So fuck that. Anyway. I say ain't and I say good instead of well. And y'all and other things. Anyhow, so now Brigid is part of that Trinity that I'm currently working with. I don't know if it's going to stick to just a Trinity, like 3 kind of goddess energies that I work with, but for now I'm really comfortable in that kind of 3 goddess holy trinity, my own kind of sacred, more on the sacred feminine end of the spectrum kind of vibes. I'm really, I'm living it. I'm loving and living it. I can't go into all of the details and all of the kind of, light bulb going off, like, aha, I see the light in the dark kind of moments. But I will try my best to tell a cohesive story of how this adventure with personified deity has kind of been overall, as well as within the past few months. Luna jumped down and then she jumped back up again. Oh, baby. You need to find a spot to go to bed. You tired? She looks a little hyper, actually. Are you a little hyper? You're looking over at this desk. Don't you dare think about walking over here. I have to move everything out of the way while she walks, and anyway. Go to bed. It's time for your afternoon nap. Yeah, sorry it's been a couple months. A lot of things have happened in the past few months. I finally finished a chapter, the second draft of a chapter that I've been struggling with for months. He had a grant application due. Our nephew was born in the first week of August. And now my brother-in-law and his wife and our newest nephew, because we have 3, they are fixing up an apartment that has been empty for like 4 months, or 4 years rather, and so it was like pretty dirty and a lot of stuff was outdated and it needed a lot of work, but a friend of the family is letting them rent this apartment and helping to pay for the renovations of it for a really cheap price, and so they're really lucky to have access to that. And so we've been, a couple times we had to go and like help them like paint the walls or clean out this or that, and so we're going back this weekend, and so it's been really, really busy. And overall my relationship with Brigid and the energies she kind of gives off and the way that she communicates with me has been probably one of the most like direct ways of any kind of spirit or ancestor or goddess that I've ever worked with. For example, in a previous video, oh, are you seriously gonna walk over here? Hold on. What is this cute fuzzy baby doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? She's gonna walk over here. Hold on. Hold on. Let me move this out of the way. Okay. Be careful. You're gonna see a cattail pop up here in a second. Oh, what baby? There she is. So, a few months ago, in a previous video, where I was talking about my kind of burgeoning, just the beginning stages of my experiences with Brigid, I mentioned ordering the Shadowscapes Tarot. And I also mentioned how I think I got a fake copy. I didn't know that going in. I just kind of jumped on it thinking that I was getting a good deal, or maybe somebody was selling a used copy of the deck, but I'm pretty sure I got a fake one, which is unfortunate. I'm thinking of using this deck since I would like to get like the real thing someday. I'm thinking of using this deck in spell work, you know, and actually if I need to like destroy the card, just going ahead and doing that. If I'm working with specific energies, like if I want to work with the idea or the energies of Page of Cups in a spell, for example, just going ahead and using this deck for it. But I went through, when I first got this deck, I went through it twice. I went through card by card because the cards weren't in order in the box. And so I wanted to make sure that I had all the cards, and one card was missing, and it was the Justice card. And I went through the deck twice, like I said, making sure I didn't miss it. I went through the box, making sure it wasn't stuck to the side of the box, and I could have sworn that the Justice card was just gone. It was just left out. And so I kind of took that as like, okay, that's Brigid letting me know in a kind of explicit way, like what she's all about. Because you know, if you've seen my previous videos on this, which I'll link the playlist up here where I talk specifically about the magical models and exploring the different magical models and the spirit model and stuff. But if you've seen my previous videos, you know that I started working with Brigid earlier this year, and 2020 has been one hell of a year. The overt violent white supremacy that has taken up way too much airtime and space and has way too much political power legitimizing it in the United States. And you know, there's shit happening all over the world. Like for here in Chile, for example, this sticker is El Negro Matapacos, which is like the symbol of like the student protest movement from a few years ago, and it has continued to be a symbol for like the struggle, like fighting against, you know, the powers that be that are corrupt and white supremacist and patriarchal and homophobic and exploitive. Anyhow, in Chile, It says territorio constituyente, which is a sign of like approving of the new constitution, because on October 25th, the Chilean people, there's one, they're going to vote whether or not they want a new constitution, because the government or the country is still functioning under a constitution that was set in place by the Pinochet dictatorship in the late 70s, I believe. The dictatorship started in 73, but the constitution, I think, is from 78. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but you know, so there's political things happening everywhere, and the subject and the theme and the idea of justice and how, you know, justice requires action and taking action and holding people accountable and holding organizations accountable, holding yourself accountable, but also there's an idea of compassion within justice too. You know, that I really tie with Brigid, and a lot of her stories as Saint Brigid are about justice and rebelling against the church authorities to do the right thing, and providing and fighting for the rights of the poor, and you know. So it was just interesting that the justice card was missing. Well, fast forward about 2 or 3 months after that, and it was in May. I don't remember. It was toward the end of May. I'd have to look through my notebook to get the exact date, but it was around the end of May when I, you know, kind of pulled out this deck to work with it again, and lo and behold, the justice card reappeared. And so when I say, like, Brigid, her communications, her signs, her like slap me upside the head kind of moments with me have been some of the most direct experiences I've ever gotten. And that, you know, the justice card disappearing and then reappearing, whether that was by happenstance or whether, you know, it depends on your approach to personified deity as to how you might interpret that. I've decided to kind of let go of that need to interpret and just let things be, and, you know, kind of mine for meaning out of that. And so that was just a clear sign that this goddess, this entity, this being, this whatever, had something to say to me and wanted to say something to me. And so it's been a wild ride. So in a previous video, I think I mentioned that I was reading or had recently read Tending Brigid's Flame, which is the first book explicitly on Brigid that I read and I really, really liked. You know, obviously my experience with Brigid is still fairly fresh and new, and so I haven't had a lot of time to really dive into resources on Brigid, but Tending Brigid's Flame by Linnea Weatherstone was a really great introduction to this goddess. And it was a few months ago. I would have to look back at my notes to remember some of the specifics of that book, but I do remember liking how she organized the book into 3 sections, and each section had to do with a different kind of fire aspect of Goddess Brigid. So I think the first section was the hearth, and it talked about like kitchen witchery and more home kind of protective magic and that kind of tradition with Brigid. Then it was the temple flame, then it was the temple flame, which talked more about a devotional practice with Brigid and had 2 or 3 chapters in that section. And then the last section was the you know, her forge, her smithcraft, like the heat and fire used to melt metal and shape things, you know, that transformative aspect of Brigid's Flame. And so I recommend that book. I got a lot out of it, and I really liked also the prayers that the author included, her own kind of written devotional prayers or spells. That kind of inspired me to write down and kind of play around with the Catholic prayers to Brigid and reword them to make them more like pagan friendly, which I continue to use in my own practice. So I'm really grateful to have read that book and be able to do that. Right now, I'm reading Brigid, History, Mystery, and Magic of the Celtic Goddess by Courtney Weber. Courtney Weber, Joey Morris recently interviewed her on her channel. I'll include that video down below. And I believe in a previous episode of this series, someone commented on one of my previous videos when I was talking about Goddess Brigid, and I think they recommended this book too. So I'm only on chapter 6, but holy crap. Courtney Weber's book on Goddess Brigid it's really, really excellent, well researched. I love the very kind of down to basic spells and rituals that she includes, and the exercises too that really get you to thinking. The chapter on healing healing with Brigid's waters, her association with healing waters and well water and natural springs and stuff like that, was particularly just like, hit close to home. And something that Courtney talks about is how there's this kind of perception, because Goddess Brigid is seen as more like kind of soft or gentle kind of goddess, maybe compared to the Morrigan, which I don't know much about the Morrigan, but I follow a lot of witches on YouTube that work with the Morrigan, like Ember Honeyraven and Joey Morris, of course, and Jessie Huntenberg, I think, also works with the Morrigan. So I know some basics about who and what the Morrigan is, and I think people might kind of make the mistake of comparing or thinking that Brigid is the opposite of that, whatever that might be. And so Brigid is this loving, gentle kind of goddess, which I don't think that is necessarily supported by the mythology even, or what we have of the mythology. I think there are stories of Brigid being associated more with like a warlike aspect within her, depending on the myths, or what we have that was written down by monks or whatever, 1,000 years ago. But I think that's a false binary or a false idea to do that, and that's something that Courtney Weber talks about in the Healing Wells chapter, which I think was chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken. And she says that actually working with Brigid for her, and she goes into a little bit of her story, but working with Brigid for her, she likened it to peeling an onion. So you go through each layer of the onion until you get to the root, to what the root of the problem is when you are in need of healing, right? And as you peel the onion, like cutting onions, it might involve a lot of tears and a lot of discomfort. And 2020 has been that kind of year for me, not just because of what's happening externally in the world that of course affects me, but it's also like changes within myself that have been happening. In a future video, probably sometime between now and December, I don't really know when, but once I finish a book I'm working on called Healing Your Emotional Self by Beverly Engel, once I finish that book, I'm going to actually put up a kind of book review about that, because I've been working directly the root of my onion, right? Something that I've been struggling with for years, something that is part of my core that needs tending, right, is self-esteem issues, and self-esteem issues that come from verbal and emotional abuse and neglect I received in childhood. And I'll have to go into more depth about that when I talk about the Healing Your Emotional Self, because that book by Beverly Engel, I'll include the Amazon link down below. Not that you should really support Amazon too much, because fuck Jeff Bezos and Amazon, like helping with police surveillance technology and ICE and sketchy shit like that, and abusing its workers too. But I find Amazon to be a good resource, and unfortunately, I mean, I have a Kindle, and for some books, since I live in South America, for some books, if I want to get them in English, it's just easier for me and cheaper for me to download them onto my Kindle. So no judgment here, but just so you're aware, it might be something to look into, how Amazon isn't the best company to give your money to. But anyway, Amazon, though, the book reviews on Amazon and looking through the 5-star versus the 4-star and the 3-star reviews and stuff like that, it helps me decide whether or not I want to buy a book. So if you specifically are interested in working through issues that you suspect are caused or like are the result of childhood experiences with abuse, specifically though verbal and emotional abuse, right? Not necessarily sexual abuse or physical abuse, but more verbal and emotional, this book might be a place to start. Or in my case, I don't necessarily have easy access to a therapist or a psychologist or anything like that, so I kind of have to do this on my own for the time being. However, this book, if you do have access to that and you are working through these kind of things already with a therapist, this book might be a good like support for that kind of work. I'll go in more into detail about that, but I'll include the link below if you're interested. But it's like, it was one of the major or most important like eureka light bulb going off, download from the universe kind of moments when finally a few months ago, probably around 4 months ago, I suddenly realized like, oh shit, all these problems with my anxiety and my perfectionism and my imposter syndrome and my fear of authority and my being judgmental sometimes or my insecurities, my self-loathing, all of this comes from just having shitty self-esteem. And that self-esteem, that shitty self-esteem, was learned and explicitly forced onto me by abusive and neglectful parents. And I think it's important that I was working with Brigid as I was doing this work, and I think Brigid is part of the reason why I saw the light finally. Speaking of Brigid and her fire light aspect, it's not just, for me, Brigid, she is the flame of the forge. She is the hearth fire. She's the spark of inspiration and creativity, but she's also sometimes that guiding light. Or, the return of the sun. I really like that she's a solar goddess. And I'm a fire sign. I'm a Sagittarius. And I have 4 planets in my birth chart in Sagittarius. And so my birthday is in December. It's on the December solstice. So depending on which hemisphere you're in, it's either the summer or the winter solstice. And so that sun fire energy is something that vibes really well with me, and that's the light of illumination. That's when you kind of have one of those like cognitive leap moments where your understanding of a problem reaches like new heights and also deeper levels. And I really attribute this journey and how well I've been able to go on this journey to Brigid's support and guiding light through this, but also tapping into her transformative aspect. Sometimes you have to like pull yourself apart, melt down all the pieces, and then forge yourself anew from scratch. And that's something that the author Beverly Engel in Healing Your Emotional Self explicitly talks about, is how doing this kind of work, healing from this kind of abuse, it involves rebuilding yourself from scratch and changing kind of fundamental aspects of your personality and your sense of self. And that shit is not easy, especially when you're doing it during a global pandemic, while there's drama in your family, while like Trump in the United States is just even more unbearable, if that's even possible. He was unbearable from the very fucking beginning, but now it's just like the presidential debates were last night. The first debate is September 30th at the time of this recording, so You know, plus I moved abroad recently. I moved from the US to here, Santiago, and that radical change and getting my dissertation started, it's been a lot. And so having Brigid's healing waters, but also her transformative forge flame, but also her guiding light, and her justice energy has been a game changer, and it was just what I needed. Absolutely. So I mentioned before how I connect a lot with her aspect as a solar goddess, the return of the sun after the darkness and depths of winter, because I'm so Sagittarian in so many aspects. It's not all of me, but a good chunk of me is that Sagittarian energy. But her energy as the healing waters really vibe with me too, because I'm a Cancer rising, Cancer being that water sign. And so that is a big chunk of me too. And part of this healing work, healing my emotions and healing and growing and working through and finally kind of leveling up in terms of how I continue to let the abuse from my first 18 years of life, well, more like 20 or so years of life, I continue to let that haunt me and shape me, and I'm done. It's a part of me, it's a part of my past, it's a part of like what formed me into me, but I want to keep it relegated in the past instead of continuing to carry it with me into the future, if that makes sense. And so in a very Cancerian way, when I feel overwhelmed by life, or when I'm not managing my emotions very well, or when there's a fucking global pandemic and shit is hitting the fan in so many different epic ways, my little Cancerian self tends to just, like a little hermit crab, shut myself into my little shell to hide away. And I start to push people away, I shut down relationships, I isolate myself from a place of fear, and this is something I learned as a coping mechanism, an unhealthily applied coping mechanism from my parents and their own histories and experiences with trauma and abuse and stuff. And so working with Brigid and her healing water aspect has helped me to kind of like know that I can trust myself to crawl back out of my shell, because if I keep myself in my shell, I go nowhere, and it holds me back. And it keeps me from ultimately having the type of experience with life that I want. Community is important, relationships are important. I'm very much an introvert, but that doesn't mean that I'm, I want to be scared and isolating myself and pushing people away anymore. I'm kind of over that too. And so she has been really just integral in that aspect of this healing journey too, which when I talk more about my experiences with verbal and emotional abuse and how that healing, that book by Beverly Engel, but also another book I read earlier this year, how those two books were very important for kind of pushing me to do this work finally. I'll go more into detail about that in the coming months. So if you're interested in that, hang tight. I'll get around to it. I promise. So just to wrap up this video before it gets too long, I wanted to talk about where does Brigid fit in my practice, because she is now, as you saw, at the beginning of the video, the little image that I shared, which was the judgment card of the Shadowscapes, or the knockoff Shadowscapes tarot. That is my chosen image, or I guess anthropomorphized image for Goddess Brigid, and she now has a permanent space on my altar. And so I think, for now, for the time being, my pantheon that I am focusing on and working with is going to be a trinity of goddesses. So of course, the creatrix, the great mother, the origin of all, she, is the mother of all, and that includes all the other gods and goddesses. At least that's how I work with her. And so she is a permanent member of my pantheon, and she is kind of the main attraction, you know. And Goddess Brigid is now part of this Trinity pantheon, and Mother Mary. And so a few months ago, this is back in May, I actually wrote down some thoughts about how exactly this trinity of goddesses works for me in here, right? And so the creatrix, I associate her with the underworld. She's more of a Plutonian deity. She knows the mystery of creation and destruction, life and death, light and shadow, all and nothing, sex and isolation, chaos and order is what I wrote down. So that's the creatrix, very much a chaos force entity, right? Goddess Brigid, I associate more with Middle Earth. The Middle Earth, if we think about underworld, Middle Earth, and then upper world or sky, that's kind of how I'm layering these entities, these deities, right? So Brigid is more of the Middle Earth. She is a solar goddess. She knows the mysteries of cycles and seasons, the sunrise, hope and change, the spark, inspiration and creativity, the hearth, well-being and compassion, the forge of transformation, and the flame of power and justice. And then Mother Mary is the third part of this trinity, and she is the heavenly or celestial kind of guiding star goddess for me. And I know Mother Mary does have strong associations with the ocean, right? So I kind of connect her with that as well. She knows the mysteries of sexual transcendence, the encounter of self and other, and compassion and love. And so I do feel a strong pull to deepen my relationship with Mother Mary. I would love to be able to find an affordable statue of her to put her on my altar, so I feel like my altar will be complete, because basically my altar, the basic components of my altar, I think there's 5 if I count them right. I have a statue representation of the creatrix. I have a kind of corner dedicated to Goddess Brigid. I have representations of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And I have my tarot kind of station where I do my daily kind of tarot pull and meditation and journaling. And the 5th component, which I feel is missing, is a little corner or a space for Mother Mary. And so once this pandemic kind of lightens up a little bit more here, and once it's safe to more safe, I guess, to go out and about, but also if I can find a statue online, that would be great too. But in due time, I will find an affordable representation of Mother Mary, which shouldn't be too hard because Chile is a traditionally and predominantly Catholic country, so there are lots of Catholic kind of stores. So someday I would love to do that, and I do feel a pull to kind of work with Mother Mary, because going back to that, healing and liberating myself finally from, the child abuse kind of stuff. Something that both authors of the 2 books that I've read so far on that, and that I've worked through and done the exercises and stuff with, they talk about the need to kind of mother yourself, because it's not healthy for me to expect my parents to be able to fulfill my needs anymore, because they never have. And they're just incapable of it. And so it's time for me to learn how to do that more for myself. So, which involves a lot of inner child work, which I think Mother Mary would be a great energy to work with for that. And kind of working on some of the shadows I still have with the mother archetype too. So once I start kind of working more with Mother Mary, I'll definitely continue to make videos explicitly about working with the spirit model of magic and how I do that in my practice. I think for now this will be one of the last videos dedicated more to Brigid. But just know that Brigid is here to stay. Brigid has a place on my altar. Brigid is part of my Holy Trinity at the moment. And Brigid is also a really interesting connection to my pre-Christian ancestors too, which has been great to kind of think about them and work with them, you know, via Brigid, or kind of start to maybe make a little bit of a connection there. We'll see how that goes. One divine entity at a time. So yeah, this has been another installment of my adventures with the spirit model of magic. When I first started this journey, I rewatched the first video that I made for this series a few weeks ago, just kind of try to remember what I said, because it was made like earlier this year. And I thought that I would divide the year into quarters, and each quarter I would work with a different model of magic, and instead this whole year has been the spirit model, and I think it's what the doctor ordered. It's what I needed. Definitely it's what I needed. So cheers to that. Brigid is associated with beer. I love beer, so salud. Cheers to Brigid. Hopefully I won't take another 2-month-long hiatus. I actually plan to make a few videos in October now that I'm over my own writing frenzy and life is kind of slowing down a little bit. We are thinking of moving before the end of the year, so maybe in November might be kind of a crazy month, but definitely before the end of the year I do want to make another video talking about as part of my anti-colonial liberation work, and kind of sharing some resources and talking more about white supremacy and, colonialism and whatnot. That is probably the next video that I will make now that I've turned in my chapter and I'm starting to get the ball rolling on the next one. So be on the lookout with that, but until then, many blessings. I hope you and your loved ones are happy, healthy, and safe, or doing as good as they can in these times, in this given circumstance. And until next time, many blessings. Bye.